Thanks for joining us. We're here with the latest episode of the Workforce Excellence Show, and we are going to be talking about employees' mental health and well-being today. I'm joined by Helen Ginman of Unique and Inclusive Wellbeing. So Helen works with organisations to create great workplace cultures where employees can thrive, and there is a strong focus around supporting employees' mental health and well-being. So thank you for joining us today, Helen.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. So can you tell us a bit about what you do at Unique Inclusive Wellbeing?
Yeah, so as you said in the introduction, I work with companies to help them create cultures where their employees thrive. And I underpin that with a strong focus on thinking about how do we better support those people that are struggling with their health today, but also what role do businesses play in prevention. So I help companies to identify some of perhaps the triggers and the stresses within the organisation to help them resolve those and create cultures where their employees can thrive within the conditions that they're creating.
Okay, so can you explain to us as well what well-being is in the workplace? Sorry, excuse me.
It's really interesting because we often use the term mental health and well-being quite interchangeably, and often you hear them going alongside each other. For me, when we're talking about mental health, we're talking about the psychological side of us as a human. When we're thinking about well-being, we're thinking about it more holistically. So we're thinking about the role our physical health has, and we're thinking about our mental health and how we can create really, happy and healthy lives around us. And some of the initiatives and things that we do from a wellbeing perspective, of course, they can get brought into conversations when we're thinking about mental health. And like I said, we see them interchangeably happen within the workplace, and they become almost one when we start to explore it in a business context.
And so why is it so important in the workplace today?
So businesses are one of the main reasons why we develop poor mental health. Of course they do. We all work usually, a lot of hours in a given week. It plays a huge part in our life across the course of our life. So, it is expected that that work will play a part in shaping our mental health. Of course, our mental health is impacted by lots of different things, situations and events that happen in our lives, circumstances that are triggered in earlier life as well as in later life. So there's lots of different things that might happen, but work does absolutely play a big part in creating and supporting our mental health. So things like, workload and work pressure, trying to balance perhaps that work and home life, the relationships that we have, whether they're fruitful, whether or not we're getting what we want, whether we feel valued in our workplace, that all ties into our own sense of identity and our own sense of mental health and well-being. So it can play quite a significant part in how we feel.
Okay. And so what are the key factors employers should consider when they're sort of adapting programs to support employees' mental health and employees' well-being?
So, we've seen this wave of wellbeing initiatives really come to the forefront. Lots of companies are thinking about, promoting things like physical activity, promoting ways in their workplace to kind of create this wellbeing side of things. They talked about mindfulness, and there's some great things that companies are doing. I think that, they're very based on a little bit of a trend, if you like. We've seen this kind of well-being trend come to the forefront, and actually we know from research that it's going to make very, very little difference in terms of affecting people's mental health. We can run events and we can run situations and days that promote positive well-being, and they're great, but what are we doing every single day? So then the first thing for companies to consider is, yes, the intensity of events is fantastic, but what are the consistent steps that you're taking every single day to create that environment where people feel okay to raise their hand and ask for help, but also where we are not consciously, causing problems for people in the workplace? And businesses can take different approaches. So they can take a reactive approach, and that's thinking of things like mental health awareness sessions, being able to spot the signs and the symptoms of somebody who might be struggling. They're the types of reactive approaches, maybe being able to signpost people to relevant supporting spaces that might be able to provide additional support. And then you have the proactive side. And the proactive side is really thinking about, what does my business contribute to affecting our staff? So is it the workload? Are we expecting too much? Are the role expectations clear enough for our people in our business? Is that clearly outlined? Is that clearly understood? How do our targets and measures tie into those things? Are we expecting too much? Or are we putting too much stress or pressure on people? What are the leadership relationships like? And looking at those types of things are going to have more of an impact in terms of being able to prevent poor mental health, but also to provide that better support for people who struggle. So those two approaches, I think, are absolutely key.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of companies automatically go to the reactive because it's far easier for us to think about, okay, let's get mental health first aiders, let's go and get some mental health awareness sessions. And it's important, right? So don't get me wrong, it's really important that we do those things. But actually, when we think about what's going to make the best impact to the people, but also to things like, our own targets, our own measures, our absenteeism, how productive people are, the attrition and our churn rate, all of those things, it's going to be decided upon around the proactive and preventative measures that we put in place.
Perfect. So a lot of our audience would have like a largely deskless workforce. So what are some of the ways companies with a largely deskless workforce can support employee well-being sort of remotely?
So, I mean, obviously with COVID-19, there's so many companies have now kind of gone to working from home and have been spread across to the UK and further afield whilst we try and navigate these circumstances. And I think, it's really important that we recognise that we're still working with humans, and each one of us are going through different situations and different experiences throughout this whole situation. And the key to anything is always around how we communicate with people. What communication are we doing? How regularly are we speaking with our staff? Are we asking them how they're coping at the moment? Those personalised conversations. I mean, I've worked with a couple of companies who, right initially hadn't engaged with their staff perhaps as frequently as they needed to.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, their staff were feeling a little bit left out. They weren't feeling a part of the company. They were feeling a little bit lonely. They were feeling forgotten about, and all of that is tying into their own sense of well-being and their own, how they're feeling about their mental health. So, engaging with your staff is absolutely critical, and talking to them and understanding how, their experience is from their perspective, and then working out how from there do you bring your teams together, whether that's virtually, how that's delivered in a virtual situation. Are you having a conference, are you having a meeting every week where everyone comes and tells you what their plan is for that week? Or are you having an opportunity for everyone to come together and say, look, it's quite difficult at the moment, and this is what I've been doing, and this is how I've been feeling. So you're creating that space where people can start to talk about how things are affecting them in a group scenario as well as on an individual basis.
Okay, can well-being be measured? Is there a way that employers can put a measure on employees' well-being?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, some of the kind of the measures that we're looking for from a business perspective, we're looking at the key people data that tells us something's not right, something's going on with our people. So that's going to be our absenteeism data, first and foremost. That's going to give us a measure of how healthy our workforce are. There's our churn rate, so how many people are leaving us over a given period of time. And then we're looking at how our performance. Now, some companies during COVID, for example, would have seen a real spike in terms of productivity. They would be a lot higher because people were working from home. Perhaps they were in their flexible working areas. They felt a little bit more comfortable. They were turning up onto work, perhaps wearing things that made them feel more comfortable. They had kids in the background and dogs coming up on the screens and all those types of things. So I think, people would have naturally felt more comfortable. So for some people, that productivity would have skyrocketed. For other people who didn't like adjusting to that new situation, that didn't want to be working from home, and actually were more impacted, I suppose, in terms of their mental health, may well have seen a deterioration in their productivity and their performance. So these are all kind of measures and triggers for us to say something's going on here and we need to work out what it is. We don't know what it is. We can't make assumptions that it is down to mental health or it is down to well-being or whatever. We have to use our data to be able to understand what's happening. Now, some companies will use different well-being measures, and they will ask their staff to score how happy they are on a scale of 0 to 10, how healthy they are on a scale of 0 to 10, and all of those types of things. And of course, you can do those things, and they're great, but they're only great if you use that data to make changes, to develop, to have the right conversations with staff, to understand what's going on. Otherwise, it just becomes a figure that people think, well, what's the point? You know, what's the point if I put 0, or what's the point if I put 10, if nothing's going to happen as a result of that? So I don't say, I try to stay away from those types of specific measures, just because you need to be really, really robust with your feedback approaches to be able to make real significant changes off the back of it, to be able to affect it. And we've got to bear in mind that our mental health is dynamic. You know, it changes on a daily and weekly basis depending on what's happening. Okay, we're not talking about mental illnesses here, so that's slightly different, but we're not talking about our mental health. Some days that are better than other days. Some days we have difficult days. Some days we get news that affects us for a little while. When we've gone through COVID, some people have felt a little bit lonely or a little bit anxious for periods of time whilst they tried to adjust. They didn't have a routine, and that made it quite difficult to kind of get that sense of normality in their life. So, we have to recognise that from day to day, how we're feeling may well change. And to be able to try and measure that at a point of time, once you've measured it, 2 weeks later, it's going to likely be out of date. So what our job is in the business perspective is to make our support processes and what we're doing from a mental health fluid enough that actually it's not reliant on us trying to measure it in that capacity and be dependent on a fixed score when it's too dynamic.
Okay, so there is a link between supporting your employees' positive mental health and well-being and productivity.
Absolutely, yeah, 100%. I mean, if you think about when we come into work, we are looking at how energized, how positive am I, how do I feel, because all of that is going to tie into how well you perform throughout that day.
Yeah.
Now, you might have had a really rubbish commute into work. It might have been really, really stressful. And by the time that you get into work, you're already feeling pretty pressured, pretty stressed over the situation. You might be hot and you might be flustered. And it's going to take a little while for you to adjust back into your day and to be feeling like you're adding value and, you're getting the buzz from doing a good job because of that impact. So business's role has to be about identifying and being able to positively support, because when people walk through that door, you want to be affecting how they feel almost immediately. You want them to come into work and be feeling positive. You want them to be feeling energetic because they know, they feel valued. There's a sense of belonging. That they've got the flexibility there to be able to do what they need to do and get the job done, but still get home for the children and things like that. And they're just a few things that contribute to creating that culture, if you like. But we will see dips. I mean, particularly with COVID, we will see fluctuations in terms of our productivity dependent on how we felt across the time. And it'll be interesting to retrospectively look back on some of the performance and see, because I'm sure we'll see, peaks and troughs of people's performance and productivity as people have navigated the last few months dealing with COVID, and perhaps initially when we were all working from home, there was a novelty of working from home, and then it really hit us 3 or so weeks in, after we've done about 50 quizzes and done fancy dress on the Friday, and then we've realized that actually it's quite tough when you haven't got the people around you that you want to be with. And whilst virtual makes a big difference, nothing compares to being physically with people and being able to have that natter at the coffee machine and, to have that chin wag about what happened over the weekend. And it's just a bit different when you're face to face with somebody than when you are virtually. So then I think, we'll see that dip in the productivity as people kind of just readjust to that. And then it will pick back up again as people adjust to the new way of working in the workplace. And working from home doesn't work for everybody. It's not everybody's cup of tea when it comes to their workspace. Some people like to be in an office environment. Some people like to be surrounded by other people so that they can have a natter with their friend. That's the reality of it. And I know personally, I like to be in an office environment. I love that. I love the buzz about it. I love the vibe. I love being able to walk past people and chat to them and say, "God, I haven't spoken to you for a while. How you been?" I love that. And being able to get stuff done when you can see somebody across the room and just go over and say, "Would you mind us just doing this?" So, I know from my experience, working from home on a permanent basis is very, very challenging. But it works for some, not for others.
So are there any companies that you can think of, maybe some that you've worked with, or just any examples that kind of set the benchmark for supporting their employees, their mental health and their well-being, or any kind of programs that they run?
Yeah, I mean, so there's HSBC is a really
Mm-hmm.
good kind of company to think about when they're talking about mental health and well-being. They do a lot of external things and a lot of internal things. They've got some great programs that are, yes, it includes your employee assistant program, yes, it includes your mental health first aiders, but it's also, you know, considering the role of leadership and how they support and coach and mentor. It's thinking about your learning development. It's thinking about your environment and the aesthetics that you've got around you and how you feel when you walk through the door. It's thinking about educating people in terms of how to spot the signs and symptoms, but it goes broader than that, you know. So it's thinking about diversity and how, you know, the equality and how we feel when we're in work, whether we feel like we have a voice. It's thinking about our identity and our gender, you know, and being able to welcome people of all different genders and people being able to bring their true self to work. So we're really thinking quite holistically around the different components that contribute to somebody's state of mind. So, you know, I like to think about mental health as almost as an emotional pressure. So we are, you know, we were emotionally responding to different situations, and all of us will respond very, very differently. So, you know, when you go into work, perhaps the way in which your manager talks to you affects you. Perhaps it's the workload that brings emotional pressure. Perhaps it's the lack of support. Perhaps it's the feeling that you don't feel that you can tell your colleagues that you're gay because you'll feel of discrimination. You know, so there are lots of different emotional pressures for different people depending on them and their life and their circumstances and their situations. And a good business recognise that diversity and really looks at different interventions for doing that. You know, companies that look at things like how do they support staff that might be going through domestic violence, you know, what are the interventions that they do for those, because again, you know, domestic violence will impact people's mental health and well-being, and of course it's a horrific thing in its own right. But one of the ways in which we can be thinking about how we better support people's mental health is to think about, you know, what support can we give people that are going through domestic violence? What are our measures? What are our resources that we can provide people? How do we spot the signs of somebody that might be struggling, and how do we direct them to the right help? So, you know, recognizing that broad spectrum of different things that can impact people, and being able to identify specific interventions that go alongside those things, make them credible. Now, does that mean that these businesses are perfect? Absolutely not. You know, mental health is dynamic. It's changing all the time. So we have to adapt with those different situations. And we've seen in the last 3 to 4 months, you know, COVID-19 has really affected how we think about mental health, because all of a sudden so many people are at home. So many people are worried about whether or not they're going to get the virus or not, whether their loved ones are going to catch it and what happens if they do. You know, there's a lot of different experiences that we're going through with those things. And although there's a collective understanding that we've all gone through it, you know, we are trying to look at things differently. So we have to be prepared as a business to respond to the different dynamics that are facing us. But HSBC is one that I always think do a very, very good job. And I see a lot of their videos that they do now, and they put those out there, and it's all about, you know, standing up for equality, standing for diversity, you know, thinking about inclusivity, and that's what I think, you know, stands them ahead.
So what are some of the common mistakes you see organisations make when they start trying to implement measures to support employees' mental health and well-being?
So the most common one is, we think we need to do something with mental health. What should we do? Let's go and put some mental health first aiders in place. Is often the first response. The second response is, let's run a couple of event days where we educate people on how to be physically active and mindfulness and to drink lots of fluids, and here's some great advice around nutrition. And then that's it. And then it stops. And they don't have any impact on long-term mental health. They don't reduce poor mental health. They don't prevent poor mental health. So, you know, if you're thinking about, I want to make a difference and I want to educate my staff, or I want to be thinking about mental health, and you want to be doing something that's going to make a difference to them. Now, all of those things that I've mentioned have a place in a business. It's not that they don't, but if that's the only thing that we do, we're not going to see any benefits to anything. We're not going to see any benefits to our people, the ones that we're doing it for, to try and prevent or better support those people that are suffering. We're not going to see that. We're not going to see any changes in terms of our absenteeism. We're not going to see any changes in terms of our productivity or in our churn. And we're probably not going to see huge proportions of return on investment for it. So, I think we feel pressure sometimes as a business to respond because of the conversations that are happening in society, the challenges that people are facing, the statistics that we're seeing, external pressures, internal pressures. And I get it, and we need to respond. But actually, if we take a logical and practical approach to looking at what we can do within the specific business that we're operating within, rather than launching into spending a shed load of money on lots of different things that we don't know whether or not will play a big benefit, but they feel quite good and they look quite good and other businesses are doing them, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the right thing for your particular business. So, rather than kind of launching in, take the time to speak to experts, to speak to consultants that get it and understand it and can help you create something that makes sense for your business and actually gives you the benefits that you're wanting to see.
And so what then are some of the negative impacts of overlooking employees' mental health and overlooking the importance of well-being in the workplace?
I mean, for years and years and years, we've overlooked the importance of mental health and well-being. So, we can see the impacts. We can see that there are hundreds of thousands of people year on year that are coming out of work because of poor mental health. That figure is only going to rise. We're seeing impacts already across the last few months that are growing and growing, not necessarily from poor mental health, but because of company situations and circumstances that they find themselves in. So there is a very real risk that we're going to have hundreds of thousands of people in a redundancy situation where people are really, really suffering and really struggling. Job loss and kind of that financial impact is one of the reasons why some people will take their own life, because they're not able to afford, to take themselves through those situations or get through those difficult situations. So, I think we shouldn't underestimate the impact of the role businesses play on shaping poor mental health. And I work with some clients today on supporting them through their redundancy process, because I want them to be able to effectively support their staff going through those things, although we can't always determine that the outcome is going to be that they have a job at the end of it. What we can do is really look at how we do that process, so what support we're providing them, what mental health access and resources can we provide them, what practical support can we give them so that they're ready to go back onto the market, because we know it's difficult out there. So I think we underestimate the role businesses play. I think we underestimate the role leaders play in influencing how people feel. I think the statistics speak for themselves when we see hundreds of thousands of people year on year that are going out of work because they can't carry on in their job. Now, some people that do have a mental illness may not be able to work. That's a reality. Some people do won't be able to, but people that are suffering from poor mental health in the main will be able to continue with work with some reasonable adjustments that are being provided to them, with some reasonable support that can be enabled, and businesses can do that, which means that they get to keep them in work, they get to keep them productive. The value to the person is significant and really, really beneficial, and they don't impact their absenteeism, they don't impact their productivity, they don't impact their attrition. So there's win 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 all over the place if people do think about those things in the workplace.
So now, as we're kind of coming out of lockdown and people are returning to work, there's going to be a lot of people experiencing a lot of anxiety and kind of fear about returning to work and how everything's going to go. So is there any advice that you could give to employers about how they can support their employees during this time, and how they can kind of reduce some of that anxiety and some of the fears that they might be having?
Yeah, so I think the first thing to do is to recognise that everybody's coming at this period of time at a slightly different angle, from a different experience. Some will have had to juggle childcare, some would have had to juggle teaching their children maths and English and science at home, some would have had to juggle trying to do work from a sofa rather than a desk space because they don't have that enabled in their, or they don't have the space in their work. Some will have had impacts of family, and loss of family and friends that have gone throughout this situation. So I think, first and foremost, we need to acknowledge that everybody will be coming at it from a different experience, a different situation. And we need to have conversations with every single one of those people to understand, how they've been affected, and to allow them the space to be able to talk about those things and to think about how they are feeling on their return to work. Okay, so for some people are going to be, I can't wait to get back in. When can I come back into the office? Other people are going to be like, I'm not sure that I want to go out yet because the media has been telling me that there's this virus around that's going to kill me, and now I'm expected to come back in. So we need to have those conversations on an individual basis and to understand how that person's feeling. And we can complete, there's some measures and questions that we can ask people that says, how have you felt over the last few weeks? How are you feeling about your return to work? What are your key concerns? What are your challenges that you think you're facing? How can I reassure you to be able to come back into work? They're all the types of conversations that you want to be having, and you need to recognize that not everybody's going to want to come back into work. That's a fact. So you need to have a strategy in place that says, what do we do when that person says, I don't feel safe to come back into work? Because although you're telling me that you've done a risk assessment and you're telling me that there are measures and precautions in place, in order for me to get from here to work, I've got to go on public transport, which I'm not really happy about doing. I've got to navigate the tube, which I'm not really happy about doing. And then I've got to come into the office and stay there. And actually, I'd rather carry on working from home, at least for the time being. So we need, as a business, to have a plan that says, okay, if that's one of the reasonable adjustments, then absolutely we need to enable that to happen, and then think about how do we, over the next few weeks, start to bring that person and feel that, make that person feel more comfortable about coming into work. If you try a full team, full company approach, you are inevitably going to cause problems within the company. And you're going to have people that tell you they don't want to come back, that have, there's going to be a lot of unrest, a lot of anxiety that's created as a result of kind of that mass messaging. Okay, yes, you can say, look, we're thinking about how we're going to return to work. Here's our risk assessment. Here's what we've done to make sure that the workspace is safe for you. Here's the measures that we're putting in place. You can do that as a mass communication. And then the next step is, we want to have a conversation with you all individually just to understand how you're feeling. And then, have those conversations and determine what the next step is for those. And to reduce that anxiety, you have to provide the reassurance. That's what people need, is reassurance at the moment. So how, as you as a business, are putting my health first, because I'm not really bothered right now about how much money you're making or what you need to do to ensure the business success. I want to know how you're going to make me safe. Yeah, because my life's at risk potentially, so that's the angle that businesses need to think about, is to be able to ease some of that anxiety and some of that pressure that people are facing, is to think about their reassurances. But remember, in the midst of that, people are still trying to juggle childcare. People are still not able to go and use perhaps their elder grandparents for childcare that you would have done normally. There are still people that are opting to do things in slightly different ways, and although the lockdown is starting to ease, people are still kind of dispersing and doing their own thing in terms of what they feel safe with. So it's really important that we have those individual conversations, that we understand the individual circumstances and we adapt towards that individual and what we need to do to support them.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Helen. Thanks for coming and joining us on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. For anyone that wants to hear more from Helen as well, she'll be speaking in our virtual conference in September, and you can register now on our website for your place to attend. So thank you very much, Helen. It was great to speak with you.
Thank you.